Hi, welcome to the podcast. Today I'm interviewing an old friend, and he is one of my heroes. I probably have 10, 12 people that in my life I've met that I would call my heroes. And John Bacigalupo is in the top four or five. I mean, he's way, way up there. And for reasons that you're going to hear as we get into this. But the startup is very interesting for a guy who has multiplied churches, planted a church in a very tough area, done some amazing things. This guy lied his way into the U.S. Marine Corps, and that's what led to this whole story. So I want you to hear this incredible story. It's going to take a couple of sessions to get this all together, but it's really, really refreshing for me to hang out with my friend John Bacigalupo. So, hey, John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ralph. Happy to be here.
So
It's a real privilege.
I want you to start out. I mean, we're going to jump right into this. I want you to start out talking about how there was some mental illness in your family. You were dyslexic, and you assumed that you weren't, you didn't know it was dyslexic. But you made some wrong assumptions. And as a result of that, you lied to get into the Marine Corps. You conned them, basically. Tell us about that. And then tell us about the repentance story when you finally told your CO what you had done and what he said to you years later.
Yeah. Well, it all started around 1969. And like you said, I had three sisters and a brother who were all mentally ill. And my parents, I think the highest grade school they went to was the eighth grade. And no one in my family could read and write. And so I grew up in that kind of an environment. It was
and you grew up in Boston, which is why you talk a little weird, huh?
No. Everyone else talks weird, Ralph. We don't know why you guys need Oz, but we don't need Oz. But anyway, in 1969, I started thinking really bad. I got to get out of this place because my brothers and sisters and my parents were just driving me crazy. And I had no idea what to do or where to go, but I just knew I had to get away. And so I walked past the post office in my little hometown, and they had that recruiting sign, "I want you." And so I went in and went to see the Marine recruiter, and they were all happy, and they didn't know anything about me. I didn't know anything about them. And so they sent me to Boston to take the test, and I failed it. And because I couldn't read anything. And so I got back to the Marines in my post office, and they said, "Yeah, you failed that test, but we can let the Navy test you one more time. And if you pass it the second time, then we can take you away from the Navy and you can be in the Marine Corps. Do you want to do that?" I said, "Absolutely, I want to do that." And so I went to Boston where they give this test, and there's all these people standing outside, and they're all talking. And these two guys were talking about the different universities they had gone to and how far they had gone on the educational ladder and all that kind of stuff. And they really impressed me. So one guy sat down on the left and one guy sat down on my right, and I was in the middle of them. And the guy on the right would write A and I'd write A. And the guy on the left would write C and I'd write C. And they weren't really that smart, but but I actually passed the test by cheating. And so I went to the Marine Corps in October of 1969. And during boot camp, I literally failed every single written test they gave me. All of the tests that I needed to take, that I used my hands or my brains or my body, I passed all of those with flying colors, but all the written ones I failed. So during graduation, the time when they actually make you a Marine for real, and you're going to go to your first duty station, there's a big parade, and I wasn't in it. I was actually in the commanding officer's office, and they were going to send me home because I had failed every written test. So I'm standing at attention, and my CO tells me, he goes, "Son, you did a really good job, and we know you really want to be a Marine, but the truth is you failed every written test, and so we're gonna send you home." And when you're a recruit or a young Marine and you're talking to a colonel, you stand at the position of attention. Your eyes are straight ahead. You're just dead focused. And when he said he was going to send me home, I totally relaxed, put my hands down. I said, no, you're not sending me home. Who's your boss? And so my recruiter, my drill instructor rather, is coming like he's going to beat me up. And the CO says, no, 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 stop, stop, stop. And then he goes, okay, son, get back to attention. So I get back to attention. He goes, anybody who wants to be a Marine that bad should be allowed to be a Marine. He signed his name and I was a Marine. And off to Okinawa I went. And that was in 1969. So I left my parents, I left everything at home and started my journey as a Marine.
So you ended up in Okinawa, and I know that when I met you, you had come from Okinawa, and then you were the first person from Hope Chapel to do any church planting on Japanese soil, which is Okinawa.
Yeah.
But in between there, a lot of stuff happened.
A lot of stuff.
I want you to tell the story. You weren't yet a believer. I mean, you probably had it a little bit in your heart, so you grew up with Catholicism. But tell us a little bit about you and your wife, about what she'd gone through. She'd had a baby by another Marine, and she wasn't very trustful, and you gained her trust. Tell us about that.
So in 1970, all the military training was over. I was headed towards Vietnam because at that time Vietnam was going, and I went to a base on Okinawa called Camp Hague, and that's where they gave you the jungle utilities. That's when, I think everybody calls them camouflage utilities now, but back then it was called jungle utilities because only people who were going to Vietnam got those uniforms. So I got those uniforms, and so I'm headed towards Vietnam, but there's a thing that I didn't know until after I retired. Because of my family all being mentally ill, I am the sole surviving son. And so I cannot be put in combat. And so they said, any volunteers? And I raised my hands, and they said, okay, you're going to stay here. But they were going to make me stay here no matter what, because I couldn't go to Vietnam. And so I ended up going to a little base called Camp Foster. And this is in 1970. And so I went to this place where you send engines and vehicle parts back to the U.S. so they can be repaired. And so there's these big boxes. Some of them are wood, some of them are metal. But you actually have to put the name of what it is and where it's going to be repaired. I can't read any of those signs. So when my boss said, go put stencils on the thing, I just put, okay, that's a good stencil. I was sending stuff everywhere because I couldn't read the signs, and that's how they caught me. And then they told me, why are you doing that? And I said, because I can't read the signs. What do you mean you can't read? I said, I can't read. Then how'd you get in the Marine Corps? My colonel let me in. And so they said, well, what do you know how to do? And I said, well, I know how to cook. So they transferred me to the military mess hall. That's where I met my wife. And actually, at that time, each barracks had its own mess hall. So I was in the top building at the top of the hill, and she was the next building down.
So I want to interrupt for just a minute. This is Camp Foster, is this right?
Yes. Yeah.
I've been there a bunch of times.
Yes.
And this is basically where your church is, right outside the back gate of Camp Foster. I mean, God just pulls things together way before we know that he's doing anything. So with your story, tell us about your wife. I want to hear this.
So one day, of course, at that time I used to smoke and all kinds of crazy stuff I was doing. And one day I was looking down the hill, and there was my future wife. And I seen her for the first time. And I literally told the guy I was with, that's the most beautiful girl I have ever seen in my life. I'm going to marry her. And he looked at me like, you're crazy. And for the next 3 months, I chased my wife like crazy, but she wouldn't go out with me.
She's
like
you crazy, right?
Yeah, because she was already engaged to somebody, and I snatched her away from that guy. Anyway, I convinced her that I was better than anybody else that she could ever do, and so we ended up getting married.
But she didn't trust you at first.
No, she didn't.
Tell about why you stayed on base and all that.
Well, the reason for that, Ralph, is because, in the military GIs, we have that really bad reputation of one-night stands. Yeah. And she had already fallen for that one time already. Yeah. And even though the guy said he was going to marry her, it wasn't like it was a done deal. There's a huge process that has to take place. And I actually was helping her in that process. And while I was helping her, I was trying to date her the whole time. And so for 6 months, Ralph, I wouldn't hold her hand. I wouldn't kiss her. I wouldn't do anything inappropriate at all. I just walked beside her. We went out to eat, and I paid for everything. And then I went back to my barracks, and that went on and on. And finally, one day, she grabbed.
Let me interrupt again. I heard that you stayed on base, that you wouldn't go off base so she would know that you weren't carousing.
Yeah, for 3 months, I stayed in the barracks. I never went anywhere. It was driving me crazy. I wouldn't go anywhere. I wouldn't do anything with anybody. And I made it so that other people would know it. And so that she would get the knowledge that, hey, he's not even going out at nighttime. He's not going drinking. He's not looking for other girls or anything like that. And then at the end of 6 months, she actually grabbed my hand and held my hand. And from that moment on, we started really seriously dating. And I had convinced her that she should marry me. And so we started the paperwork. And that paperwork is, at that time, her whole family had to go through an investigation, because we're talking about during Vietnam era. Yeah. And there was a lot of communist people on Okinawa. And the military wants to make sure that I'm not marrying a communist and then moving that person on base. And so she passed all that. And we got married May 17th, 1970.
And so your first son,
1970,
is actually her son from another man, right?
Yes. Yeah, she was never married before, but I adopted him because, I'm a little old fashioned that way. I think when you marry somebody, you take the whole package, not just pieces of it. And this was part of her past, and her past needed to be mine, and mine needed to be hers. Tosha's the first woman I ever told everything to about my family, and she still wanted to marry me. And that's when I realized, yes, she really does love me, because she doesn't care about my brothers and sisters, the illnesses that they have. She's not worried that in the future, if we have children, they're not going to have it, all that kind of stuff. And because that really weighs on you heavily, Ralph. When you come from a family of special needs and you're somewhat normal, because we still don't know what normal means, but whatever normal means, I was that. And when my first biological child was born, that's my daughter Victoria, I literally was ready to, if she was disformed or had any kind of illness like my brothers and sisters, at that time I was ready to end her life and mine. I did not want to live like that again. That was before Christ.
Yeah.
And but then
Hideki was also worried about that, right?
No, Hideki was 3 years old, so he's just a little kid. He doesn't know anything about all of that stuff.
But he was worried about you still going to be his dad.
That was many years later when I told him that he was my stepson. I hate using that word, because he's not my stepson; he's my son.
Right.
And I had listened to a pastor preaching about the most painful thing he ever experienced was he was 21 years old, and his parents told him that they were not his biological parents, but he grew up 21 years thinking these are his biological parents. And when they told him that, he said it was the biggest shock that he had ever had. And I didn't want that to happen to my son. And my wife didn't want to tell him. So I finally, when he was 12 years old, I told my wife, if you don't tell him today, I am. And so that day, that pastor that preached that message, I brought him with me so I could talk to my son. And I brought him with me so that I use the right language when I'm talking to my son, so that it would be as less shock and as less painful as possible. And so I explained to Hideki the best I could, when sometimes parents make bad choices and bad decisions, and we made one. And so I want you to know that, your biological father is in the States and I am your stepdad, but I love you like my real son. I've never treated you differently. You've always been my son. And that he started crying and I started crying, and he said, but you'll always be my papa, right? And Hideki, I will always be your dad. Yeah.
That's cool. So jump back because you had a pastor in your life by that time. So jump back and tell us about.
No, he wasn't my pastor at that time yet.
No, but I mean, you had heard him. So
yeah. Well, yeah. I had become a Christian by that time, and I was.
Tell us about the experience that led you to become a Christian, because that's quite a dramatic thing.
Right. Well, my kids have grown up. They're not grown up, but they're in school, and they're at the age where they need me to be able to tell them, mathematics and history and all that kind of stuff. And Ralph, I still can't read yet. And so I can't help them in their schoolwork. And the more they ask me to help, the more I realize how delinquent I am and how, you know, unprepared I am. And so I started thinking of a way out. And in the military, even if you commit suicide, your spouse still gets your life insurance and they still get an ID card. They get all the privileges and everything. And so I started thinking of all the things I could do. And, you know, I came up with the idea that the best thing for me to do would be to commit suicide. And you know, I had gotten my wife a job working at the club system. So at nighttime she would work, and during the day I worked as a Marine. And so I watched the kids at night, and she would come home like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning when the system was over, and I'd wake up at 5 or 6 and go to work. And we lived that kind of lifestyle for a while, and then all this crazy stuff was happening, and I had gotten hurt really bad in my right leg, and they finally did surgery on me. So I was stuck at my house for over a month. And at that time, the television went off at midnight. And so there was nothing to do. And I would just lay there. And that's when I started thinking about all these different things. And so my idea was to go out into my driveway, cut the water hose, put the hose inside of the muffler, put the other end of the hose inside of my car window, tape the window up, sit inside my car with the engine on and turn the radio on, and that would take my life. And then she would come home a few hours later, would find me, of course, call the ambulance and all that. My kids would never know. They would be sleeping. They wouldn't know what happened. And she could come up with whatever story she wanted to. And she'd have my ID card, she'd have my insurance policy, she'd have my military pay. So this was the best deal all around. And so I have the plan. I'm ready to do it tonight. So I'm in the living room and I'm waiting for her to go to work. And then I got to put the kids to sleep, and I'm waiting for them to go to sleep. Meanwhile, I'm in the living room, and I'm sure my kids had gone to sleep by now, but I didn't recognize what time it was. And out of the corner of my living room, I actually heard a voice speaking to me. And I immediately recognized that voice as God. And I knew Jesus was talking to me, because I've known Jesus all my life, but he was never my savior. He was just the guy that was in charge of the church. Because like you said, I was born and raised Catholic, and they don't teach you about salvation. They, you know, you just say 5 Our Fathers, 5 Hail Marys, and you're good for another week. Mm-hmm. And so my parents used to send me to church when I was little, but I mostly went to hang out with my friends and mess with the girls. And so I'm in my living room, and I hear this voice, and this voice is asking me questions. And I can't always answer the questions. He always has a better answer than I have an excuse. And I started making excuses because, you know, I don't know what's going on. This is very strange to me. And I remember the last argument was I said, look, I can't get him to leave me alone, because in my mind, I'm going to commit suicide in an hour. And if you leave me alone, we can talk face to face. Because, of course, I'm going to heaven. I'm Catholic. Sure. Right? And so I figure if I can get him to be quiet just for a few seconds, you know, I'll stomp him with this one, and he can't fix this. And I said, all right, I know that you wrote the Bible, and I believe the Bible is true, but I can't read the Bible. And if you teach me how to read the Bible right now, no schools, no tutors, no extra curriculum, I don't have to go back to school. You and me right now, teach me to read, and I will give you my life, and I will never take it back. And the Lord said, deal. Go get your wife's Gideon Bible and read it. So the Gideon Bible that my wife had was half of the page was English and the other half was Japanese. I read the English part, and I could read all of it. Now, I stumbled at people's names, but I could read the whole Bible. But you're sitting in front of a huge library of books that are your books today. Yeah, yeah. So my understanding is that the Lord taught you to read, but you still, I know you've graduated from college, you still need help writing. You're still half dyslexic, which it reinforces the miracle to me. Yeah. That it was Jesus talking to you, that the miracle is that he taught you to read in a flash. And yet he didn't teach you to write, which kind of reminds me of Jacob and his hip out of the socket. A reminder that, hey, I did this, and I'm letting you know I did it, and you're going to remember it the rest of your life. Yeah. This is an incredible story. Go on with it. I'm sorry. Well, no problem. One of the things that amazes me about what you've just said, Ralph, is that I used to pray and say, Lord, why didn't you do the whole thing? Because, you know, later on, because let me continue with the story of my living room, and then I'll get to where
Sure.
we are in the educational thing. And so I started reading the Bible, and it's the first book I ever read that had no pictures in it. And so I got the idea to go to the base chapel and see the priest. Why would I go see anybody else?
Yeah.
And so I went to see the priest, and he was telling me, you know, the decisions that you're trying to make right now are so important and so life-changing. You should go home and wait 2 weeks and then come back and see me. I'm suicidal, and he wants me to wait 2 weeks. So I knew that wasn't the right answer. And so there was two young Marines that worked with me where I worked, and I had told them what happened to me. And I said, will you come to my kids' church with me? Now, I sent my kids to Maranatha Baptist Church because that's 3 hours of alone time with my wife every Sunday. Exactly. So I sent them off, and they're gone. I'm not a Christian yet. I'm not thinking like a Christian. Yeah, they're gone. And I treated this guy really bad, but he kept coming every Sunday. And so one of the guys said, yeah, I'll go with you. And so we went to the church, and they wouldn't let me in. They said, this is Sunday morning and it's children's church. Adults are not allowed. This is just children. And so I looked at the guy, and he's a person of color, meaning he's a black Marine.
Sure.
And so I looked at him because I've never been to a Protestant church. I have no idea what it's like. And so I said, okay, I'll go to church with you this week, and you come back here with me next week. Is that okay? He goes, yeah, you can come with me. Unbeknownst to me, he took me to a congregation where I was the only white guy in the church. And it was scary. And the reason it was scary is because at the time we were actually having race riots on Okinawa.
Wow.
And so I had never seen that many black people in one spot in my whole life. And it scared me. So I sat very close to the door just in case I had to run. And this guy named Willie Reeves.
Said they loved you.
They did love me. Yeah. And so when announcements came, the pastor's name is Willie Reeves. And he's in Maryland. He still pastors, and I'm still in contact with him. And so the lady who reads announcements, she gets up and she says, "Is there anyone sick? Is there anyone that needs help? Is there anyone that needs to talk to the pastor?" When she finished saying that, I don't know why, I just stood up and I started crying, really crying bad. And I said, I need Jesus, and I need Jesus right now. And there's no sermon, there's nothing, just announcements. And Pastor Reeves, at that time, all the ministers used to sit up on the platform, right, and would be facing the congregation. So Pastor Reeves was by himself. He came out of that place, walked down to where I am, put his arm around me, walked me to the altar, and him and I knelt down, and he prayed the prayer of salvation with me. And I became a member of that church that day, and I never went to any other church except his. And he became my first pastor. And of course, I ended up becoming a minister in his church and all that stuff. And later on, the doors opened for me to become the pastor of the Door Faith Church, which was the first church I ever pastored. And so that salvation experience has been an amazing story for me. And I'm so grateful for what God did. But you're right. That church just loved me. No one ever addressed me. In fact, it's really funny because people would try to tell other people about me. After about a year and a half, I was already a minister, and I was sitting up where Pastor Reeves was. And God had already taught me how to read. And so I would read the scripture every Sunday morning. And it took a long time, but everybody was patient with me. And they would try to describe me. They would say, you know, the guy with the natural straight hair. The light-skinned brother, really light-skinned brother. And as a last resort, they would say, the white guy. And they, oh, John. And that's how they would describe me. But yes, they loved me then. They still love me. Whenever I go visit Pastor Reeves in D.C., yeah, I am welcomed like one of their family.
That's cool. So I want you to fast, unless there's something else you want to tell us, that would be fine. But I want you to fast forward a little bit and tell us about coming to Hawaii and the whole deal of overseas duty stations and, you know, back to back, all that. But how you stumbled your way into Kapunahala Elementary School, where we were having church after listening on the radio, and, you know, your cynical attitude as you're listening on the radio.
Yeah. Well, I told you I was pastoring a church on Okinawa called the Door Faith Church, and the headquarters is actually in Hawaii on Young Street. And so, like any good minister, when I transferred to Hawaii, I went to the headquarters church and said, "Here I am. You guys licensed me and ordained me. What do you want me to do?" And they sent me to Kaneohe, and I was just an associate minister, but within 3 months, I was actually taking over the whole church. I wasn't the pastor, but I was doing everything.
But
And
you're also on Kaneohe Marine Corps Air Station at the time,
yeah,
right?
yeah, that was my first duty station.
We were in Kaneohe as a church.
Right.
We
And
were,
so,
we were just getting started.
right. And so, of course, this is 1980. And so I was in the Door Faith Church, and some some things happened. There was no sin involved, but there was things that took place that I thought, I can't submit to this. This, if you have someone who's in leadership and you cannot correct them because you're afraid other leaders will quit, fire them all. That's my point of view, right? And it still is today. If I'm going to lose 3 leaders because I'm threatening to fire one, all 4 of them can go.
Yeah.
Because if you say you support me in the ministry, that means you have to support even the decisions that you might not agree with. And so I had to leave the Door of Faith Church. I went to the headquarters. I talked to the president, and then the president said, I understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, and I really believe you're a sincere man of God, and you're going to do great things wherever you go. And so we don't want our ordination papers back. You please keep those, and we'll keep you in high standards, but you can go join any church that you want. And so I had already had plans to come back to Okinawa someday in the future and start a church. I just didn't know when or how. And so my wife and I are no longer going to a church anywhere. We started visiting other churches. I went to this one church in Kaneohe, and the pastor came up to us after our second visit and said, "Man, we would really love to have you as part of our church. We really can tell how much you love, how you and your family really loves the Lord. But your wedding rings, that's gold, and you shouldn't be wearing that. You should take your wedding rings off, put them in the offering basket. We'll sell them and send it to starving missionaries." And so I thought in my head, if you're a missionary and you're starving, God didn't send you. Because if God sends you, you might not be eating T-bone, but you will eat.
Yeah.
Because if he sends you, he's going to take care of you. So that was the last Sunday we ever went to that church, because I'm not taking my wedding ring off. This tells all the ladies around me I'm taking, leave me alone. And so I decided that my wife and I would do church in my living room until we got back to Okinawa. But I want to be fed. I can feed them spiritually, but I need to be fed. So I started listening to the radio, and I listened to this guy, and I thought, man, this guy is smart. Man, this guy really knows what he's talking about. And but I didn't want to hear all the commercials and all that stuff. And so I listened to the whole message. After the message was over, I shut the radio off, and I thought, man, this guy's good. I wonder where he's at. I wonder where he is. I was really thinking about this guy a lot that week. And then the following Sunday, I kept going through the station so I could find this guy preaching again, and I found him. And now I don't want to hear the message. I want to hear the announcement. Where can I write? How can I write this guy? And maybe he can send me his sermon tapes so I can be on his mailing list or something. And then he says, Hope Chapel, Kaneohe Bay. And I went, he's right here. And so I started looking for the church, and I found you. And if you can remember, my first Sunday in church, I was in a 3-piece suit because the church that I had left was Pentecostal holiness, and you had to wear a 3-piece suit no matter what. And so I'm in that habit now. And then coming from a predominantly Black church, they all dress up for Sunday morning. So it just made sense to me that everybody wears suits when they go to church, because I'd never seen a church like yours before.
So everybody's in shorts and t-shirts and whatever. I'm the only guy with long pants on, probably. And yeah, I remember when you came in the door because I
Yeah,
think you wore that suit for a couple of weeks
I did.
because we thought you were a little strange.
Well, what happened was is I actually walked into church like this because, some of the girls, they have their bikinis on underneath their clothes. And if you have a white blouse with a yellow polka dotted bikini underneath it, you can see and
Uh,
I want to see that, but I want to hear you more than I want to see what's going on. So I make myself blind to everything that's around me because I am convinced that you really know what you're talking about and that I need some mentoring from you. And so my wife and I decided to join the church, and little by little, the suit came off, and little by little, I took my hand away, and I began to realize that no, God's more interested in the position of my heart than he is about what I'm wearing on the outside. And so I've been wearing aloha shirts ever since I joined Hope Chapel. So I love aloha shirts.
so it was very quick in my mind, anyway, that we saw what you had to offer, and we were, fledgling church. We I know that we were in that building for 18 months where we met you. And we were already 6 months old when we moved there. So between 18 months and 2 years in, that's when we met you. And very quickly, you, the dyslexic person who can read but not write, became the children's church pastor for our church. And also I think you were leading a mini church on base, which was our training ground. If we saw you
Mhm.
could pastor a bunch of people in a mini church, then we knew where we're going. And then time comes up that you're moving away. We start praying that you can go back to Okinawa, which is a little bit of it's going to take God doing something because you're not allowed to do back-to-back overseas duty stations, and you already had
Yeah,
because Okinawa to Hawaii, you already violated the rule, and now you
yeah,
want to go back to Okinawa again, which is further violating the rule. And on top of that, they want you only got 3 years or so left, and they want you to muster out near Boston someplace because that's where you went in. And so I remember that was a big deal. We felt like, we came to Hawaii feeling that we were called to that place to plant churches and to instigate a movement of church planting, which is really what happened. But we also felt that our secondary mission field was Japan. And I remember, and this is before you came there, that we're 6 months in. So we're in Kapunahala Elementary School, and John Wadley brought a bunch of Campus Crusade kids, and most of them were on their way to Japan for a summer outreach. And we'd been praying because we felt like God told us that Japan was our secondary field. And so we'd prayed, God, give us a goal, because we had a goal for Hawaii to reach 1% of the state in churches we started or helped start. But with Japan, we felt the Lord just said, walk through the doors as I opened them. So all we did in the beginning was give money to those kids. And then you showed up and you wanted to go back to Okinawa. So the next big step for us was to pray that God would let you go back to Okinawa. And he did. And so take it from there, because very quickly you were a bivocational pastor. You were still working as a gunny sergeant in the Marine Corps, and you also were planting a church in Okinawa. Tell us about that, and tell us about the little miracle about the building that you ended up with, and where because that was another kind of cool story.
yeah, yeah. It's amazing the things that God can do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when I did 6 years on Okinawa, which is the maximum time you can do, and then I transferred to Hawaii. And when I transferred to Hawaii, that's of course when I heard you on the radio and all that stuff, and became part of Hope Chapel. I had left the Door Faith Church, and I know God wants me to go back to Okinawa. I know I'm going to plant a church there. The possibility of me coming back to Okinawa is really not that strong, but I am fighting like crazy to get back to Okinawa. And the doors opened for me to go. And there were some people that were behind me that were really helping me. And so at that time, even though Hawaii is part of the United States, for the Marine Corps side of things, it's actually an overseas duty station because it's not connected to the continental United States. You actually have to go over an ocean to get there. So it's overseas. And so I did 6 years in Japan and then 4 years in Hawaii, because I actually extended for 1 year in Hawaii so that I could finish doing everything that I needed to do. And so I was part of Hope Chapel about 3 years and a few months. And it's interesting to me because you said I told you I was going back to Okinawa, and you said, "Well, why don't you go back as a Foursquare pastor?" And I went, well, "What's Foursquare?" Because I never heard you talk about a denomination, just Hope Chapel. And so I thought, well, what's that? And so I was really happy about that, to be able to become a Hope Chapel. And so I actually ended up getting my orders, and I got transferred back to Camp Foster. It's amazing how God just keeps me in the same spot.
Yeah.
And so, of course, at that time, I can read anything, I can understand anything. I still have difficulties writing, but the most amazing thing about this thing about not being able to write on my own, one of the things that I really felt like God taught me was I need people.
Yeah.
I can't do what I do without other people helping me. And, people tell me write a book. I'd love to write a book, but I need someone to help me to write the book. I can't write it on my own. And even when I was in the Marine Corps, most people knew that I had a very difficult time writing. Although I could do it, it took a very long time because I have to look up in a thesaurus every single word to make sure I got the right word.
All right.
And so I got my orders to come to Okinawa, and oh, this is a not good memory, okay? But I'm here for a couple of months, no phone calls, no emails, no nothing from you. And I'm thinking, he doesn't like me anymore. He hates me. And nothing's happening. No doors are opening. So I write this letter that, Ralph. And then the same day I mailed the letter, you called. And I'm answering the phone and, oh my God, what did I just do? Because I can't get the letter back. So I said, Ralph, there's a letter coming your way. Please don't read it. Please don't read it. Just throw it away. I don't know what happened to that letter, but I hope you never read it. But
I
it
don't
wasn't.
think I did because I don't remember it at all.
So we started working very strongly together after I got reconnected with you, because it's difficult to call a foreign country if you don't know all the information and all this stuff. So yeah, it took a while for all of it to come together.
Well,
And
in
so,
those days, it was very expensive to make a phone call.
yes,
It
yeah,
actually took 5 days for a letter from mainland Japan to get
yeah,
from the US to Hawaii,
yeah,
and
yeah,
5 days for it to get back to Hawaii.
yeah,
So communication was terrible. I remember when because by shortly after you were there, maybe 2 or 3 years after you're there, because I came there a couple times, people in Japan started getting fax machines, and I thought
yeah,
in their homes, I thought this was brilliant. It was really a kind of a mechanical version of email before we had email. Because
yeah,
to me, it was like, wow, you can send somebody something and they're not even home, and then they can read it when they get home, and they can send it to you while you're asleep, and when you wake up, you can read the thing. And I thought, this is long before email, like 10 years,
yeah,
15 years before email. And so, and it doesn't cost much because a fax is actually a phone call, but it's a very brief phone call. So we were having real hard time communicating in those days. And yeah, so this is interesting because I'm hearing your side of the story that I don't think I've ever heard before. This is really, really fun for me. So get
yeah.
into it. What happened? How did you get going in Okinawa? What happened?
So I actually started Hope Chapel in the living room of my house. with just my kids and my wife. And I was preaching one Sunday, and my daughter says to me, "Dad, why are you preaching so hard? It's just us." And I said, "Because I want to give you the best I have. It doesn't matter how many people are here. That shouldn't be important. What's important is that you get the best that I can give, that God puts in my heart for you guys." And so little by little by little, the neighbors started joining our church. And of course, they're active duty. There's no Japanese people coming to our church at that time except my wife. And then a couple of months into doing the church in my house, one of our neighbors joins, and his wife is Okinawan. And we're still friends, and we're still in contact with each other. This is like 30 something years ago, 35 years ago now. And so little by little, we started growing in our living room. And I started telling people, okay, we need to start collecting tithes and offerings so that someday in the future, when a building comes available to us, we'll have money to be able to rent something. And so we started doing that. And I asking you for advice, and you gave me some ideas of how I should do this. And so I did that, where people in the church would count it, and I would show the bank book to everybody every week, and so we could see it growing. And so this little building became available, and I could buy it for $3,000, but we didn't have $3,000.
Also,
And
you could buy the building, but not the land, right?
I could buy the building, but not the land. And the people who owned the land did not know that the person who owned the building was selling the building to me. Because in Japan, before you can sell a building, you have to ask the people who own the land, do you want to buy the building? And if the landowner says yes, you have to sell that building to the landowner for whatever the going rate is for that building. But the person who owned the building never told me that, and I didn't know that. And so I told all the people in the church, I goes, look, I found somebody that will lend us the money to buy this building if it's okay with you. And I said, this guy's name, I think he's a really nice guy. I know him. He's a good friend. His name is John Bacigalupo. He will lend us $3,000, but he wants his money back. And so we're going to have to pay this money back because he has a temper, and we're going to have to deal with that. But he's a nice guy, and he'll lend us the money. And they said, okay, let's borrow the money from him. So I actually lent the church $3,000 so we could buy this building. And then my brother-in-laws, they stripped it down, repainted, fixed everything up. And then you actually came before our first service and dedicated that aluminum building. It was a prefabricated aluminum building that we could actually use for 18 months. And then we'd have to move. But it gave us something that we could start in. And we started in that little building. And then from there, of course, we really started growing. And there was over 70 people at one time in that little building. And at that time, people were very faithful in their giving. And we actually ended up with a bank account and a real bank and all that kind of stuff with nonprofit status. And it started growing. And it was just amazing. And so now I need to find another building. And so in our present building that we're at right now, the man wanted $1,600 a month for the building, and $1,600 a month for us was a lot of money. We were barely having $1,000 a month come into our church through all the people that were coming, because I had never taught on tithes and offerings yet. I never did any of that because I was afraid to. And so I went to talk to the landlord, and the landlord, he doesn't want nothing to do with me. He doesn't want nothing to do with the church. But my good friend named Seisho Tanahara, and his name's going to become very important in a few minutes. But he has some type of cerebral palsy where his legs were actually twisted like this. They were wrapped around each other. So he walked on his hands in our neighborhood, in the village that my wife comes from. And people used to call him Pooch, which means doggy. They would, Pooch, 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 Pooch. And can you imagine how terrible that is as a kid? And he grew up like that. And the Shriners Club, and they spotted him, And he ended up being the first Japanese person ever sent from Japan to Hawaii, the Shriners Hospital in Hawaii, to have his legs straightened out and fixed so that he could walk. And so all of his education is in English, and he speaks English as good as you or me,
Yeah.
without any difficulties at all. And he's been my friend for 54 years. I've been married for 53. And so I asked Seisho, can you come talk to this guy? Because everybody knows Seisho. So he goes, yeah, I know him. He's a friend of mine. So we went and knocked on the door, and he's seen me standing beside Seisho, and he's kind of shocked. And so he comes in, he invites us in, and Seisho tells him that I'm a good guy and blah, 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 and you can trust me and stuff like that. And the guy says, well, I want $1,600 a month. And I go, sir, we don't have that kind of money. He said, well, how much can you afford? And I said, we can afford, it's Q-Manyam. So it's equivalent to about $900. And I goes, this is what I'd like to do. I'd like to rent the building for 3 months. And if we're good people and you like us, then let us stay for a year. And then at the end of a year, if you still like us and we're still good people and we're still being honest about everything, then I'd like to sign a contract for 5 years. Right there on the spot, we got the building.
Wow.
And we've been in that building ever since. And I signed a lease one time for 10 years, but that was 20 years ago. I never signed another lease. The guy just said, stay there as long as you want. And whenever I need my building back, I'll give you a 1-year notice so that you can find someplace. And the deal that I made with him is that I will fix anything and everything that goes wrong with the building. You never have to fix anything. You never have to repair anything. Don't worry about anything, but don't raise my rent. And he agreed to that. So
Wow.
we've been living like that all this time. I told my wife, I really believe God wants me to start a building fund. And why? We're already in the building. But honey, someday we're gonna have to buy a building. We have to get out of here. I don't know when or how or where, but we need to start a building fund. And she says, so how are you gonna do it? And I goes, well, first I want to go to the States and I want to contact everybody that ever was a part of our church and ask them to help us. So I actually visited 17 states and many people, and I paid for that airplane ticket on my own. And I was away from home for 3 months. And so I came back to Okinawa, and my wife says, so how much money do you raise? Nothing. She goes, well, the next time you have one of these great brain ideas, just give the church the money that it would cost the airplane ticket and stay home. So I had to let that rest for a little while because, you don't want to bring up something, let that wound heal. And so about 3 months go by and it goes, Tosh, I really feel we're supposed to start a building fund. And she says, well, if you think we're supposed to, then go ahead because you got to do what God tells you to do. And I goes, but I can't ask people for money yet. Why? Because I haven't given any money. I have to donate to the building fund first.
Yeah.
And she goes, okay, so what do you want to do? And I goes, I'd like to give up 6 months of my pay. And, for 6 months, we won't get any pay and we'll put it in the building fund. Then I'll ask the congregation to donate to the building fund. And so that's what we did. And then the church council and myself got together and said, okay, we're going to start this building fund. So what are some of the restrictions we're going to have on it? And I said, at the time, I thought, what do you mean restrictions? And, well, it's money designated for a building. You can't use it for anything else. And so we said, okay, we'll tithe to the building fund so that there's always money going into it. And then, at that time, I used to send sermon cassettes because they were cassettes at the time. I would send out sermon cassettes to everybody that wanted them and an envelope that had a stamp on it already so that they would send us some money back. And people did. They started sending money back to our church, which was extremely helpful. And then we made the decision, if money comes to us from any location other than the offering basket on a Sunday morning, we'll put it in the building fund. And we'll never touch the building fund for any reason unless an emergency comes up. And we came up with plans later on. And so our building fund started growing like crazy. We had one guy that was in Saudi Arabia who was a colonel, and he was also a GS-14, and there's no churches there. So he calls me and says, "Can we tithe to Hope Chapel?" I said, "Absolutely." And he sent us this amazing tithe check every month, and it went to the building fund. And so our building fund really exploded. And so now we're looking for land, and we're looking everywhere, Ralph. We looked at so many properties and so many buildings.
I know, I've been there. I've seen so many properties that you thought you were gonna.
Yeah, you prayed for some of them.
Yeah, I did. A lot of them.
And I thought, Ralph prayed we're surely going to get this thing. Every time it fell through, it fell apart. And
Hold on,
I really got frustrated.
You're going to tell us a really dramatic story, but there's people who are listening to this who are thinking about church multiplication, all that. If you're listening, I want you to know we're going there. John has done amazing things without a lot of resources. I mean, they have churches in mainland US, in Philippines, all over Okinawa. They've done some incredible things. But what he's telling is really a story of God's miraculous provision. And it's in a church that if you're listening to this, and especially if you're in the US, you need to get a hold of this in your mind. This church is got now Japanese speaking people in it.
Yeah, we do.
That's a small group still. But on the English side, it gets up to about 80 people. And then people go on float or they get transferred out. And the church will shrink back to 15, 18 people. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. This man is incredibly frugal, has a huge amount of faith, and believes sincerely in making disciples who will make other disciples. And they have planted churches with what you would consider to be a lack of resources. They have resource ministry all over the place. And so we're going to get there. But I want you to hear this resource story because that's really what we're into right now. And this is really crucial. But I know that by now in the podcast, some of you are going, well, what's this all about? We're not talking about making disciples or multiplying churches. When John talks about his friend Seisho, that's a huge disciple in terms of, and he's a big part of the story that's going to unfold here. So go ahead, John.
So we're in our church, and so because you talked about the Philippines and other things, I'll go there and I'll come back to.
Go there later. Go there later. I want you to tell this story.
Okay. So everything's falling apart. Nothing's working. And we got so close one time that all I had to do was sign my name and we would have owned this property. But before I could sign my name, the Lord reveals to me how they've been lying about stuff. And we actually went and checked, and they actually were lying about stuff. So I my name, and we got out of that deal. And that was heartbreaking for me. I literally, that night, was crying on my bed and saying, Lord, I keep looking at all these places and everything's falling apart.
So this is not the place that you're in. This is the place that you were going to buy.
Yeah, because we've been trying to buy land and buy a house because, or build a building, because my big scheme of things is that if I had everything the way I would like to have it right now, there would be not just income coming from Sunday mornings, tithes and offerings, but there'd be money coming from English classes, Japanese classes, cooking classes, Bible college classes, all kinds of things where people would contribute something where we would have this resource. And then I want Hope Chapel Okinawa to be the resource that will fund everything else, everywhere else. And so this is my mental picture. And so while I'm going through all of this, the Lord puts in my heart, it's time for you to start giving back. Now, up until this time, I'm receiving everything. I'm not getting anything. I'm on the receiving end. And so I'm going to go to Seisho, and then I'll go back to that story. And so Seisho's been my friend, like I said, for 54 years. He speaks perfect English. He uses two canes to walk around on there. They're the kind of canes that latch onto your forearm here.
Mhm.
And so he uses those. He can walk without them, but he can walk faster and more comfortable with them.
Yeah.
And so he always walks with those. And one of my friends in the United States before I joined the Marine Corps also had the same exact situation, and I taught him how to ride a bicycle. And so I have this, and of course, because my brothers and sisters are special needs, Seisho's handicap doesn't affect me at all. I've seen all this before, so I just treat him like a normal guy. I don't look at his handicap. I look at him, and so we got this friendship going, and he's been my translator. Every land deal, every bank deal I've ever had, he's been doing all this translation for me. Well, in April, he ends up going to the hospital he's having some pain in his stomach, and it's really, really bad. And no matter what he takes, the pain's not going away. So he decides, I'm going to go to the hospital. So he goes to the hospital, and they don't tell him what's wrong. They just tell him, you need to stay in the hospital for a couple of days. And so come to find out, he has pancreatic cancer. He has some other kind of cancer that I don't know the name of it, and he has kidney failure. And the doctor he doesn't tell him, but he tells Seisho's stepsisters that he has from 1 month to 3 months to live. And so they are just losing it. And they tell the doctor, please don't tell him, because doctors in Japan have no bedside manners. They just walk up, you're dying, you got 3 months, get your house in order, blah, 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 and they walk out of the room. It's just cold and dry. Yeah, so it's not, don't let a Japanese doctor in Japan tell you your loved one that they're going to pass away. Do it yourself. And so they actually come to me, and they're sitting in my living room, and they told me Seisho's dying. And he has from 1 month to 3 months to live, and we cannot tell him. We just can't bear to see his face when we break the news to him. Can you please tell him? This was the hardest thing I ever had to do, to tell my best friend he's dying. So I go to the hospital. I'm sorry I'm tearing up a little bit, but
it's all right.
It's only been 5 months.
Yeah.
And so I get to the hospital, and other people are talking, and I'm waiting for everybody to be quiet so that I can tell Seisho. But they're all communicating, they're all laughing, they're all having fun, and nobody knows what's going to go on. And finally, there's an opening for me, and I say, Seisho, I need to talk with you. It's really important. And I said, you don't know this, but you don't have much time. You're going to go to be with the Lord pretty soon. And the doctors say between 1 month and 3 months, you're going to go home to be with Jesus. And at this time, I'm crying uncontrollably. I'm just really losing it bad. And Seisho says, why are you crying? You know where I'm going. I know where I'm going. This is a great thing. I know I'm getting to be with Jesus. And I tell Seisho what a great privilege he has, that he knows he's dying, and he has a chance to tell people whatever he wants to tell them. He can go tell people and say, I'm really sorry for what I did 30 years ago, or I forgave you for what you did 30 years ago. When you have time, you can fix things. Yeah. and leave in peace. And he did that. He talked to several people and forgave them, and they forgave him. And life is life. Yeah. And sometimes we hold hurt feelings. Yeah. And man, if you have time to get rid of those hurt feelings, you should, especially if you're alive. and you can live a little bit longer and renew all that stuff. And so his sisters told him, because Seisho is going to leave everything to his sisters, and he has about $3 million worth of properties in his name that he owns, and he has a very large bank account. And so he gave power of attorney to some person, and I know who the person is, and I want to get into that part of the story, but his sisters tell that man and Seisho, why don't you give John your house and land for a church? And Seisho says, that's a great idea. From the moment Seisho, because in Japan, it takes a long time to transfer properties from one person to another person. It's not you just walk in, you sign your names, and it's a done deal. It's a process. And from the time Seisho told me he's going to give me the house and the land, until 2 weeks later, the land was in my name. So right now, I own the house and I own the land. We didn't put it in the church's name because it really takes about 6 months to do that, and he doesn't have 6 months to live. And so they put everything in my name, and then later on, I'll take care of everything the way it's supposed to be. And so the house is actually bigger than our existing church.
Wow.
Our existing church is a 2-story building. The sanctuary is 25 feet wide and 35 feet long. The building that Seisho owns, it's 28 feet wide and 41 feet long, and it's 2 stories. So we can use the first story as Sunday school and church office, and the second story as a sanctuary, but we have to reform the building, which is going to take a lot of money to do that. Thank God for the building fund.
Yeah.
The building fund will allow us to do all of that and have leftover. And so we're so grateful to God for that, and for Seisho. So most of the people, so far, this is what we've been doing. Let's go to Seisho's house instead of let's go to the New Hope Chapel or let's go to our new church. Let's go to Seisho's house. And so I plan on putting a plaque on the outside of the building in loving memory of Tata Seisho, in English and in Japanese, because Seisho told me, I don't want a shrine, and I said, Seisho, I know that. I'll never do that to you. Don't worry. But I think it's appropriate to put a little
Really
that says in honor of. And so before all this took place.
John, I want to interrupt you for a second. The Seisho that I know was always a little bent over and walking with those 2 crutches. And I hope that in that plaque you could, I'm envisioning some bronze or something like that. But,
Bronze.
But have a picture of Seisho as part of that plaque, because this man was incredible. His commitment to Jesus, his commitment to the church, but just his commitment to life in terms of the difficulty that he lived with. I mean, you're talking about, I only met him after the surgery. You're talking about what life was like before the surgery, when he literally had to walk on his hands. I only knew him as the man with crutches, but I knew this indomitable person. And I think it's so appropriate that you do something to honor him. And that other people would come to, if as much as possible, from generation to generation, have respect for a man who did all that he did.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. I did his funeral, of course, but I did it in a Buddhist temple. So I actually was inside of a Buddhist temple, and the monk was there. And of course, he did his whatever he does, and ringing the bell and all that kind of stuff. And I don't understand anything he's doing. And but then he gives me almost a half an hour to talk about Seisho. And most of the people that are in the temple are all members of this village. And so they all know Seisho, and they know I know Seisho. They know he's a member of our church. We've been good friends for all these years. Everyone knows it. And I began to talk about Seisho and honoring him, and told the whole neighborhood that he gave Hope Chapel that building, and we're going to turn it into a church. And the monk said, that's a really good idea.
Wow.
And so this monk and myself, we're really friends. When Franklin Graham came to Okinawa, I actually took one of Franklin Graham's reporters to meet the monk, and him and I were talking, and they interviewed us, and it's in the Baptist magazine. I have a copy of that magazine, and yeah, we've had a really good relationship. I'm hoping one day that we can, take all that stuff out of that temple and put a cross in there.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the amazing things that you guys have done in terms of church planting,
Okay.
how that relates to mini church, how it relates to guys in the service, mustering out, some guys retiring. You got some stories to tell. Give it to us.
Well, we started Hope Chapel, and like I said, in 1970, and I've always felt like,
Not 1970, John. That's
yeah,
when we started the first one.
I'm sorry,
You're getting old just like me.
right? Yeah, 1989.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go, 1989. 1986.
Yeah.
Because that's when I left Hawaii and I started Hope Chapel. And, our church is up and down all the time. And because Marines come here for 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, most people come for 1 year and they can extend for another year. So they stay for 2. And people who stay for 3, that's families. So
Yes.
wife and kids come, or husband and wife come. And so the maximum time I have somebody in our church is for 3 years, and then they leave. And I got this idea that, we should be recruiting in our churches people who are active duty now, disciple them, train them, equip them to become pastors. Then when they retire, they don't need a lot of money from the church because they already have an income, and they can go anywhere in the world and live. It's so easy. And so one of the guys that came to our church is a guy named Mike Hancock. And Mike Hancock has gone to be with the Lord, but his church is still there. It's Hope Chapel, Stafford, Virginia. And he was my assistant pastor, and we sent him to Virginia. The Marine Corps transferred him there, and he started the church, and it's up and running and still working today.
And
And
he
so I
mustered out,
started.
right? What rank was Mike?
Mike was a gunny just like me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
mustered out in Virginia, so he stayed there.
Yeah, he messed it out in Virginia. He actually got a job working on base as the safety officer for the airport. And so he had a really good job. He was bivocational, and planted the church, and he became part of the denomination in the U.S., which took some finagling on our part. But anyways, that was a done deal. And then in the process of all of this, I really felt like the Lord tell me, it's your time to start giving back. And part of that conversation is that Hope Chapel Kaneohe, Hope Chapel Lanikai, well, not Lanikai, that's a girl's name. Jeff John Hunold used to pastor it.
Kapolei.
Kapolei, Hope Chapel Kapolei and Hope Chapel Kaneohe, they used to pay for me to go to Hawaii. And they would bring me to Hawaii every year for leadership advantage. And sometimes they would bring Tosh, and which costs a lot of money to do that. But the churches really believed in what we were doing and how we were doing it, and wanted to encourage us. And so it was just a great deal. So I was always on the receiving end. And now, I don't know if you remember this story, but one day my church council said, "Hey, who's paying for you to go to Hawaii?" And I said, "Well, Hope Chapel Kaneohe, there, Ralph takes care of me." And he goes, "Well, this year, go tell Ralph, don't pay for John anymore. We will do that." And man, that so surprised me. And so I remember meeting you in the parking lot. And Ralph, I got some news for you. We don't want you to buy my airplane tickets anymore. Hope Chapel Okinawa will pay for my tickets from now on. And I remember you putting your arm around me and saying, "Wow, one of my kids have grown up." And that really is the whole process, where we help somebody until they grow up and can take care of themselves, and then they help somebody. And so that's what God told me. And so in this process, there's a lady in our church, and she says, "Hey, I have a pastor friend in the Philippines that would love working with us. His name is Tony Aglan. And so we went to meet Tony, me and several other people on a mission trip. It was our very first mission trip into the Philippines. And Tony and I just hit it off. It was just really, really a wonderful experience. And so a couple of years went by, and he said, you know, I want to become part of what Hope Chapel is doing. I want to change my name. And I said, you don't have to change your name. You know, you're already acting like we do. And I mean, you don't have to, you can be whatever denomination you want. I don't really care. I'm not trying to build my kingdom. I'm trying to build God's kingdom.
Yeah.
And he goes, no, I want to change our name to Hope Chapel. I said, well, go right ahead. And so we started planting churches out of his church. And we actually have 10 churches in the Philippines right now that all of it originates from Hope Chapel, Okinawa, and Hope Chapel. I'm trying to think of the Filipino name. It's the capital city, Manila. Yeah, Hope Chapel, Manila. And so we have a Hope Chapel in Dumaguete, Hope Chapel in Oslo, Hope Chapel in Benalonan, and they are so far apart. And every year we go to every one of these churches. Even Mindanao, we have 2 Hope Chapels in Mindanao, and if you're American, you're not supposed to go there, especially if you're active duty. It's off limits.
I've been to Mindanao, and there's just so people who are listening to this, you go to McDonald's, there's a guy at the door with a sawed-off shotgun and another guy with an automatic rifle. They're there to protect you. You go to the mall, yes. It's the same deal. You go in your hotel, and they're at the front door, and then the hotel I was in, you go to the elevator, and there's a guy to push the button for you. The elevator's automatic like in America, but that guy's got a .357 Magnum strapped to his chest because he's there to protect you. Mindanao is we're having a lot of Islamic terrorists, really, and
yes,
they kidnap Americans. It's a scary thing, but you know, it's interesting as you're talking. A lot of the Hope Chapels, especially in Hawaii, they're all changing their name to something else, and that people really upset. And I laugh at it because when we started out, we took over this little church in Manhattan Beach, California, and we changed its name. And now people are, you know, that we sent out by Hope Chapel, and then change their name to something else. And including Kaneohe Bay is now Anchor Church, and everybody gets all worked up about that. I think it's great.
It doesn't bother me either.
No, Jesus is moving on, and we need to move along with him. But tell me a little bit about you. Tell me about the Philippines. Tell us about Okinawa, because you guys have planted some churches in Okinawa also, right?
Yeah. And so they have this thing called the Balit Bayon box. It's a huge cardboard box, and it doesn't get shipped by weight. It gets shipped by size. And so this thing is it's probably 40 inches long, maybe 40 or 50 inches high, and maybe 25 or 28 inches wide. And it takes a lot of stuff. When you fill it with clothing and stuff like that, one person cannot pick it up. It's too heavy.
Wow.
We have sent over 400 of those boxes to the Philippines. And what they do is, at the time, because the price has gone up because of COVID and all that kind of stuff, but at the time, these boxes were about $120 a box. But what the people did with these boxes is they would take them into the poorest areas in the Philippines, preach the gospel, and then open up the boxes and let people have what we would call used clothes, but for them are brand new clothes.
Yeah.
So to give you an idea of how this moves, I try to take teenagers with me whenever I go on my mission trips. Not too many, but I try to take 1 or 2 with me so they experience this firsthand. And going on a mission trip changes people's lives. You end up getting more than what you gave, and I don't care what you give, you end up getting back so much more. And so my granddaughter, she had some shoes and some other clothing, and she threw them in the trash. Well, I went to the trash and took them out and put them in a Balit Bayon box. Now, I don't know where these boxes are going. I just pack them, write an address on them, and send them. So someone else does all that because I still don't write that well. And so I just pay the money and ship them off. And so we went on a mission trip to Oslo, and I got 2 boxes that are waiting for us. So they're going to distribute these to the whole area after I preach the gospel about Christ as being Lord and Savior and blah, blah, blah. And so, of course, my granddaughter's with me, and it's time to tip these boxes over. And they open up the top box and they just push them over. And out of the top of the box comes my granddaughter's shoes.
Wow.
And this little girl picks up these shoes and is crying. She's holding the shoes to her chest and crying. And one of the guys on the team said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "This is the first pair of new shoes I've had." My granddaughter completely loses it and falls in love with the Philippines. And she went with me every trip after that. Yeah, we for a time there, I thought she was going to get married to a Filipino.
She's a great girl. I love your kids and especially your grandkids. This is so cool. So I just want to just clarify for people who are listening to this. This is a church that when it's big, there's 80 people in it. When it's
Yeah.
small, it's less than 20.
Yeah,
They sent 400 plus boxes that cost $120 plus to send, plus all the stuff that they round up for it. When we put our heart in the Lord's hands, God can do things through us. I know that if you're listening to this and you've gotten this far into this, you may be pastoring a fairly small church and you may feel resource poor. But the truth is that whenever we open our heart up and allow the Lord to do the thing He wants to tell us to do, that's when the miracles are going to happen. And so,
yes,
I've been reading lately a lot in Philippians. It seems that the devotions that I've been reading, I read several, keep bringing me to Philippians 4. And then, about not worrying. And then Colossians talking about being content. Godliness with contentment is a great gain. When we come to that point where we're going, okay, it's enough. It's got to be enough because He said He'd provide, but it doesn't look like enough to me. I'm frustrated. And then if I make a conscious decision, I'm going to believe this is enough because He said He would provide all my needs. That's when innovation happens. The best things that we've done in all the years that I was pastoring that were innovative, that stood up against tradition, stood up against religion. We did things in different ways that were wonderful ways. Always happened when other people would look at us and say, "Oh, you're resource poor." And we would say, "No, Jesus promised to deliver. He must have delivered. We're just not using it right." And so let's figure out what right is. And that's when innovation took place. So anyway, I've kind of told my little story here. Go on and fill this out for us. We want to hear more about the Philippines and more about Okinawa.
well, the people donate clothing and shoes and things like that. But I don't want you to think Hope Chapel Okinawa paid for every one of those boxes. We did not. Many people who donated clothes also donated the money to send the box, because I told everybody how much it costs to send a box.
So, but if you weren't sending the box in the first place, they wouldn't be motivated to pay for it.
No, they wouldn't.
And it's starting out believing in Jesus when we don't have a whole lot. That there's incredible things.
Yeah, it started off by me telling the congregation, the Lord told me it's time for us to pay back. And they said, "How are you going to pay back?" And I told them, well, we've been on the receiving end. Even the stairs that go to our church, the building that we're in right now, when I rented the building, the whole first floor in the back where the stairs are was mud. We actually had 3 cement blocks that you had to step on each block to get to the first stair.
I remember.
And the Lord told me, go to Hawaii and go to Kaneohe and go to Hawaii and go to Hope Chapel.
Kapolei?
No, California.
Oh, Hermosa Beach.
Yeah, Hermosa Beach. Thank you, Ralph. I am getting old. Well, Hope Chapel, Hermosa Beach, and Hope Chapel, Kaneohe, and asked them for money. And I went, and you guys gave me money, and we cemented that in. You know,
And
you
then
don't.
I just want to put a shout out in here. Zach Nazarian at Hope Hermosa had never met you before, and they dumped money into what you were
Yeah,
doing.
they did. Yeah, I knew Zach. I had seen Zach, but I never actually met him. And then I went there one time and to meet him and to tell him I made an appointment to talk with him. And I actually told him, and I know you don't know me very well, and I came out of Ralph's church and blah 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 blah. Gave him the whole story and showed him what we were trying to do because I needed $8,000. I needed money to buy a van because I couldn't get the guys from the bases far away because there's no transportation. And who wants to walk on mud? And so I went to Zach and I said, could you please lend me? I didn't want anybody to give me any money. Just lend it to me. I'll pay you back when I have a chance. Just don't make it. I got to pay you back next week, but I will pay you back. I promise. But can you lend me $4,000? And Zach says, I really don't know you that well to lend you $4,000, but I know Ralph and I believe in Ralph. And if Ralph believes in you, I believe in you too. And so if Ralph will lend you 4,000, we'll give you 4,000. So tell Ralph that. So I told you that. It's the very first time in my whole life as a young minister, as a pastor, you were in a council meeting that same day that I asked for money. And I wanted to put my ear on that door to find out what you guys were talking about so bad. And then when you came out, Aaron said what he said, and I ended up receiving all the money. And I remember I wrote my first check because I had to pay back the money. And I wrote my first check and sent it to Hope Chapel, Kaneohe. And that's when I got the canceled check back and said, because you said we want to borrow, we had to lend it to you. We were going to give it to you, but you said you want to borrow, so we lent it to you. But now that you're trying to pay it back, we canceled that debt. Thank you for trying. And we owned that van for like 8 years or 9 years, bringing people to church. I can't tell you how many young Marines gave their heart to Jesus because of that van, and how many people have walked on the cement that we bought with that money. Yeah, and so it's okay to be on the receiving end. If you're a small church and someone's blessing you, thank God for that every day. Don't forget it. Take note of it. Don't write it off like, oh, they're supposed to. No, they're not supposed to. We're not supposed to be depending on people. We're supposed to be depending on God. So every time something comes, thank him for it. And so when the time came for me to tell the whole congregation, I'm telling them these stories so that they know, because there are people who don't know how we got the van, don't know about the cement stairs, don't know how we painted the building. They don't know where the money came for all the chairs that we have. So I'm telling them this. And so I said, now it's our time to pay back. And we need to start spending money to help other people and other churches. And that's how we started going to the Philippines. That's how we started sending the Belief Bion boxes. But I want everyone to know this, that's listening. When we're talking about planting churches, I don't want you to think that all these people went out and rented a building or started a house church or did all of these things. I actually bought tents from the United States. They're 20 feet wide by 60 feet long, and they have cement poles and connections. So I bought the tent and all the connections because I could buy all of that for about $800, $850, something like that. And I could take it as carry-on luggage with me to the Philippines. And then in the Philippines, we would buy the long poles that we needed to connect everything together. We have 4 tents in the Philippines that are still being used as church today. They're tent churches. And what they did is they hang up curtains around the side so that the rain doesn't come in. They put a wooden back on the front of it, and they put a podium or whatever they're going to do, and they have services every Sunday in a tent.
So tell us about Okinawa. What you've done in Okinawa, because I know you've done stuff as well
So
as the Philippines. You've done stuff in Okinawa.
yeah, so we have um, at one time our church had almost 100 people. We've never really gotten past 100 people ever in the history of our church. Um, um, I, I might talk with you privately about this, Ralph, and you can say it, but uh, when I tell people I have a building fund, I think they would be shocked if they knew how much money I'm talking about. And I don't know if it's appropriate for me to say that, but it took a very long time to do it. But to pay people back, when people see their tithes and offerings being used for something other than, you know, somewhere else or something else, they want to give more. And it's just been my history of that. And so I had two assistant pastors, one named Sean Shavers and the other one, Brent Long. And Brent Long was the first one that I sent. We got him licensed and ordained, and I don't necessarily think you need to have that, but in Japan, it's more credible if you do. You'll have to research the area that you're in, but in some places, if you don't have a document that says you're licensed or ordained, people don't want anything to do with you. So we licensed and ordained um, uh,
Brent or Sean?
yeah, Brent Long. And we sent him off to, it's a Motabu, so it's about an hour and a half away from me. And he actually is planting house churches. And so he's having house churches and they're meeting together like once a month or once a quarter, they bring them all together, but he's doing that. And he's been doing that for a while. We're always in contact, the three of us, but I don't have any power over them. When I sent them off, I sent them off as autonomous. They don't need my approval to do anything. They're the senior pastor. They do whatever the Lord calls them to do. If they want advice or opinion, we get together and we talk about that. But I just leave them alone and let God build his kingdom. And then we did the same thing with Sean Shavers. And Sean Shavers, I sent him off and he started Hope Chapel Ginawan, which is about 25 minutes away, but that's by the expressway. And so it's quite a ways from us. And Brent is actually using his house. Sean was using his house for a very long time and outgrew it. There's just no room left in his house. So they actually ended up renting a building, and they're in that building right now, and he's up to about 50 people in his church. And but Brent took my place as the leader of the Philippines because, like you said, I'm 72 now, and walking up and down those mountains and hills is a little more difficult for me. But when I go on a mission trip, I'm not going on a vacation. The
Right.
moment my feet hit the road, I'm day on, stay on, and until we get the mission done. I'll rest when I get home. And so that takes a lot out of you when you're in your 70s. So I realized someone needs to take my place, and I took Brent with me a couple of times and introduced him to everybody. So everybody loves Brent, and he took it over. I'm still involved. I'm still connected where they talk with me, but Brent makes all the decisions.
That's good. That's good. So what does the future look like? Where do we go from here?
Well, the future of our church right now is I need to reform the building that we're in. And then once we're in that building, we no longer have to pay rent anymore, and which will be a great blessing for us, especially where we're at right now. Because right now our church is down to about 18 people. That's everybody, including the kids. And my wife is kind of concerned about it, but I said, honey, it's not our church. It belongs to Jesus. You know, the Lord could send a revival in our area and we could grow to 500 in 3 weeks. It's God's church. Let him do what he wants to do. All we have to do is be faithful in what he's called us to do, be faithful in what we have. He'll take care of everything else. And we're still supporting 2 churches financially in the Philippines. There's one church that I send $175 a month to. That pastor, we financially support him. The house that he's living in is owned by a member of the church that introduced us to the Philippines. So she owns that house, and he's in that house rent free. He just has to pay light bill and water bill and gas bill. That's it. And so $175 is more than enough for him. The Hope Chapel Oslo, we send them $100 a month because they have 3 outreaches up in the mountains that are so far away from their church, they need gas money to get there. So we provide that for them. Yeah.
That's good. Well, I just want to say thank you for taking time to do this. Thank you for being my friend for all these years. I'm so proud of you and the things that you do, and you're such a strong example for other people to follow. So just again, thank you.